Well, if reading the Patriot Act isn't enough for you and you happen to be shopping for a new book to read, you're in luck. Bush's former Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld has just the memoir for you. 800 pages worth of his side of the story. So, is it an acceptance of responsibility and perhaps fault, or simply self-vindication? Well, the author of this book right here, America's Failure in Iraq, Michael O'Brien, joins me now for more. Michael, always good to see you. So, what shocked you here? Anything? Any of these revelations from Rumsfeld's book? Anything a surprise?
Well, I'm surprised that he actually admitted that they all made a mistake, that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. He actually says that in his book. He says none of us were liars. He goes down the list. I wasn't a liar. The president wasn't lying. Nobody was lying. We just made a mistake. And, you know,
he does shift a lot of the blame at the same time, right?
See, here's the thing. He's the Secretary of Defense. The Secretary of Defense executes warfare by the order of the president, but the Secretary of Defense executes warfare. And, you know, you can't help but be reminded of Robert McNamara in the Vietnam War. And when he came out with his memoir, I recall a cartoon in the paper. I can't remember which paper, but it was McNamara with his book under his arm standing at the Vietnam Wall. And the caption was him saying to himself, "Well, I feel good about myself, guys, now. How about you?" And, you know, it's this vindication. I didn't do anything wrong. This is why I did what I did. But what he did was a terrible, terrible mistake. McNamara's was a mistake. Rumsfeld's was a mistake, because even if it's true that they thought there was WMD in Iraq and there turned out not to be any, as we all know, how do you invade a country that is of no threat to you on the assumption that they have this or they have that when you don't have actual, irrefutable evidence?
Why do you think? Have you been able to answer that question? I mean, you've written extensively.
No, I think they went on, frankly, I think they invaded Iraq because there was an agenda, and they went on the assumption that Saddam Hussein had a massive WMD program, and they showed up, we showed up in '03, and it wasn't there. And that's one heck of an assumption. And here we are now, 8 years later, 4,500, 5,000 Americans dead, hundreds of thousands of Iraqis dead, on an assumption that he had WMD, that he was a bad actor, which he certainly was. Nobody disputes that fact. And his whole book is basically saying the world's a better place that Saddam Hussein is gone. Well, at what price? That's my question. Sure, it's a better place that he's gone, but at what price? Is it also a better place that he's gone and 500,000 Iraqis are dead, who wouldn't be dead today if we hadn't invaded? So is it a better place for that reason, too?
I mean, one of the revelations of the book is that the planning for Iraq actually began in November of 2001. So given all that, does that surprise you when you say that clearly there had to be some kind of agenda here? Well,
it's coming out that George Bush had a plan. He wanted to invade Iraq because he told his biographer before he was the Republican nominee in the summer of 2000 that, you know, it helps presidents to have a good war to fight and it boosts up their popularity. And then there's the theory, again, just a theory, that because Saddam did make an attempt on his father's life. But I also think that George Bush, frankly, just wanted to, you know, show the world that he was a tough guy from Texas, spin his spurs, and prove that he, you know, wasn't just a lousy businessman getting where he was because of who his father was. And I worked for George W. Bush. I've shaken his hand. You know, I really had such high hopes. Experience? He's a wonderful guy when you meet him face to face. He really, really is.
Do you think that...
But I think he made a huge mistake with that invasion of Iraq.
Do you think that, you know, given everything that Donald Rumsfeld sort of revealed in his book and shifting the blame and criticizing others, do you think that, you know, that circle is still going to be as close as it once was between him and Condoleezza Rice and...
Donald Rumsfeld's book could have been 8 pages, not 800. He could have said, you know, I follow the orders of my president. We didn't do a good job. He was invading with a fraction of the troops, and he was also trying to reinvent the U.S. Army too. He was trying to eliminate divisions and go to brigade combat teams. I'm an Army guy. I'm a West Point graduate. You don't reinvent the Army in the middle of 2 wars. You just don't do that. That just doesn't make any sense. And he could have said, you know, we thought that there were WMDs. There were not. We made a huge mistake. And I need to do everything I can. This is Donald Rumsfeld, to make sure that our country doesn't make these mistakes again. It wouldn't have taken 800 pages to say that. He could have accomplished a lot more in 8. It's a real shame that it seems that he's going the route of Robert McNamara.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of critics of the Bush administration say that it was really Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney. Those were the two men really in charge, and a lot of folks, a lot of critics of Bush just call him a puppet. Would you agree with that assessment?
Well, I think there's a lot to be said that he, I'll put it this way, I think he was way too easily influenced by members of his staff. But he was the president. The buck stops with the president. No one could have done anything if he had said, you're not going to do that. You know, and the fact is, just because somebody gets elected president, and this is not just George W. Bush, just because they get elected doesn't mean that they're the right guy for the job. And nobody could have done anything if George Bush had said, you're not going to do that. That's not going to work. And one last thing, I need to say this. Even if the invasion wasn't properly executed, the biggest mistake we made was doing nothing for over 4 years while Iraq went down the drain because of our lousy invasion. And I say in my book, you know, people, and I'm a conservative, but people say, well, the war worked out great, the surge was great, so the war was justified. That's reverse logic.
Right,
that
happened many years later.
That was 4 years later because the invasion was lousy. So you can't use that logic, that dog don't hunt, as they say. The invasion was lousy, and we had to do something, and we waited way, way too long. And Donald Rumsfeld was the Secretary of Defense through all of it.
And that's what Senator McCain is coming out and saying now, because Rumsfeld sort of criticized him in his book, and McCain said, well, where were you? You know, where were you in the beginning? But one last question very briefly. You know, we saw this increase in outsourcing to private security firms like Blackwater, like Halliburton. You have written so much about this issue. Talk a little bit more about that in reference to Donald Rumsfeld. Is he taking any responsibility and saying, yeah, I did this, was it good, was it bad?
When you want to invade on the cheap, when you want to invade with a fraction of soldiers in uniform, but you need more bodies, contractors fit the bill. And what ends up happening is, you know, I use the word mercenary in my book. Now, Webster's dictionary says foreign people from a foreign country. Well, we have American mercenaries that are fighting our wars now, and they're making a ton. And the military-industrial complex has now gone way beyond what Dwight Eisenhower thought it was in '61. We're now supplying soldiers in addition to tanks.
Yeah, it's another very interesting point. Author Michael O'Brien, thanks so much for being here.